Hi, everyone. I'm Rosemary Miller here with Peter Cohan, a senior contributor at Forbes and associate professor of management practice at Babson College, here to give us an earnings reaction for Nvidia. Thank you so much for joining me today, Peter.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So, Peter, can you provide an overview of Nvidia's fourth quarter earnings and revenue, highlighting key factors that contributed to the company's success?
Yes, I mean, first of all, I will just say that I was blown away by their results. And they exceeded expectations that were super high. And I think a lot of people expected the stock to fall because they wouldn't be able to beat and raise, which you sort of have to do every quarter in order to have a successful reaction from the stock market. So the company reported 265% growth in revenue. That was several $billion more than investors expected. They also achieved 800% growth in earnings per share. They increased their revenue guidance for the current quarter, so it's up 300% from the year before. I mean, it's just astonishingly fast growth. And also, this is an extremely profitable company. I mean, I think this is clearly the most fastest growing, most profitable company in the world.
Really? So, how did the market respond immediately after NVIDIA's earnings report, and what impact did it have on relating stocks?
Yes. Well, this is amazing. I mean, essentially, the stock went up 15% since the announcement, and it's opened this morning 15% up. And this has had a very positive impact on all the chip-related stocks. I think AMD is one of the ones that did well. ARM did well. I'm not sure about Intel, but these are, AMD is clearly trying to compete with Nvidia in this space, but I think Nvidia has a huge lead. I think it's perhaps an insurmountable lead in this market, and maybe the biggest threat to Nvidia over the long term is well, there's two threats. First of all, one of them is that generative AI, which is driving all the investment in its chips, suddenly, it stops. It doesn't pay off. I mean, companies are doing a lot of experiments trying to use generative AI to see if it can make their business grow faster, make it more profitable, make it more productive. If those experiments do not pay off, then it could be that the companies that are buying the chips, namely Microsoft, Google, Meta Platforms, and other companies that are doing these AWS that have these huge cloud services businesses, will find they don't need to buy as many chips because there's not as much demand as they thought there would be from companies. The other factor is that all of these companies that are doing the cloud services are saying, wait, we have to spend so much of our budgets on the chips that are coming out of NVIDIA. Can't we do it ourselves? So they're trying to figure out if they can build their own chips. And so if both of those things happen, it could be that NVIDIA will slow down. But I mean, they're forecasting very rapid growth through 2025, and they have been so amazingly good at basically giving the impression that they're going to grow really fast, more than 200%, and then exceeding that. I mean, it's just amazing what they're able to do.
So, speaking of these chips, like how does the company's performance even compare to its competitors? I mean, we're talking advanced micro devices and ARM Holdings.
Yes, I mean, essentially, um, uh, NVIDIA has something like 85 to 90% market share in the in this market, which these AI chips that are called graphics processing units that were originally used for things like gaming and for cryptocurrency mining. And they operate differently than central processing units in that they are essentially able to perform many tasks at the same time, whereas central processing units are more serial. So essentially, you just have everything done completed in a serial fashion rather than a parallel fashion. So they're much more efficient at doing very complex tasks. But the chips themselves are really only a small part of the reason why NVIDIA is successful. I would say another huge reason they're successful is because they've developed these software libraries that enable the developers to apply this technology to all sorts of different applications. And they've been building this library since 2006. So their competitors just don't have this experience. So it's not just the power of the semiconductor, but it's the power of it's sort of like what Apple does by locking people into an ecosystem of products where they have all their photos and all their Instagram posts on there. And if they switch out of Apple, then they have to redo the whole thing. It's just they're locking customers in with the software.
Hmm. So you spoke about they have other things going other than just the chips. I mean, what's the shift from the central processors to the accelerators? First of all, what is that? Could you explain that? And how does NVIDIA position itself in this industry-wide shift?
Yes, I mean, I don't really understand accelerators that much. I haven't really written that much about them, but from what I can gather, accelerators are basically technologies that are used to sort of strengthen the processing power of the central processing units, which are, the chips that essentially Intel was the leader in when the PCs first came out in the 1980s. So it's sort of a core competency for Intel, and so it potentially could boost Intel's business. As far as whether the accelerators with the CPUs could actually compete with what NVIDIA is making, I'm not really sure that is going to happen. But I do know that Google is trying to use a form of accelerator to build its own chips, so it doesn't have to buy from NVIDIA. But the thing that I find interesting is that Google does not seem like it's able to execute very well. I mean, I find it fascinating that Google was the one that invented the technology that is called transformers back in 2017. They invented the transformers that are the core technology for ChatGPT. But what happened is that all the people who developed that technology at Google left to start their own firm, and so you have Google developing technologies that they can't commercialize. So I worry about whether Google will be able to apply these tensor processing chips in a way that allows them to avoid having to buy from Nvidia. So they're not really executing very well. They come up with these great ideas, but they struggle to commercialize.
So what about other companies like Amazon and Microsoft?
Well, Microsoft and Amazon both could have some success there. I mean, frankly, Microsoft is not known so much for its hardware, but they could potentially develop something. I mean, they could certainly afford to hire the people who design the chips, but can they compete with? I mean, the way I look at it is that if you have a firm that is run by its founder and it's been successful run by its founder, which is what you have with Nvidia, that person has a tremendous advantage over somebody who's running a company who is essentially somebody who came in after the founder. It's not that the people who come in after the founders are terrible managers, but sometimes if you have one of those rare people who can take an idea and turn it into a publicly traded company and make it incredibly successful the way Nvidia is, they just have some sort of superpower that makes them better at coming up with new ideas faster and making them commercializable than the CEOs of Microsoft or Amazon is another example where the founder is gone. And the question of whether they can innovate at the rate and with the hit rate, the success rate of a company like Nvidia, which has the CEO who's an amazingly capable guy.
Well, Peter, is there anything else on your radar regarding NVIDIA that you believe should be on ours?
I mean, I think the most important thing that we have to look at is whether companies are getting a high payoff from their investments in generative AI. I'm working on a book that's almost done called Brain Rush, and I analyze hundreds of different applications of generative AI, and I found that there are two that have the highest payoff. But even those, we haven't really fully studied them and demonstrated the payoff. The first one is using generative AI to write code, because if you can write code, you can make the programmers more productive, and you can also allow people who aren't programmers to essentially write code themselves, so they can become much more productive. That's a huge application of generative AI, and if companies can use that and be successful with that, that would be a real boost for a trend in the future for NVIDIA. And the second one is using it for customer service. So you can load up into your own computers all the successful customer service interactions you've had. So a new customer service person can look at that and figure out what to say when a customer calls. You'll end up giving better customer service, higher customer retention, and higher productivity. So if both of those applications become widely adopted among companies who are now experimenting with generative AI, I think that will extend the growth rate of NVIDIA for a long time. Now, having said that, I think there's a change that's happening right now, which is from large language models to small language models, which may not require those expensive Nvidia chips. So that's another thing to think about in the future.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Peter.
Thank you, Rosemary.